He saw him lift his hand toward the people and heard him say in a loud voice of sorrow over the waters, "He is dead." We saw him lying upon the catafalque. A wail of sorrow went up from the people. "Parnell, Parnell, he is dead." They fell upon their knees, moaning in sorrow. And he saw Dante in a maroon velvet dress and with a green velvet mantle hanging from the shoulders, walking proudly and silently past the people who knelt by a water's edge. A great fire, banked high and red, flamed in a grate, and under the ivy-twined branches of the chandelier the Christmas table was spread. They had come home a little late, and still dinner was not ready. But it would be ready in a jiffy, his mother had said. They were waiting for the door to open and for the servants to come in, holding the big dishes covered with their heavy metal covers. All were waiting. Uncle Charles, who sat far away in the shadow of a window, Dante and Mr. Casey, who sat in an easy chair at either side of the hearth, Stephen, seated on the chair between them, his feet resting on a toasted boss. Mr. Dedalus looked at himself in a Pierglass above the mantelpiece, waxed out his moustache ends, and then, parting his coat tails, stood with his back to the glowing fire, and still from time to time he withdrew a hand from his coat tail to wax out one of his moustache ends. Mr. Casey leaned his head to one side and, smiling, tapped the gland of his neck with his fingers. And Stephen smiled too, for he knew that it was not true that Mr. Casey had a purse of silver in his throat. He smiled to think how the silvery noise which Mr. Casey used to make had deceived him. And when he had tried to open Mr. Casey's hand to see if the purse of silver was hidden there, he had seen that the fingers could not be straightened out. And Mr. Casey had told him that he had got those 3 cramped fingers making a birthday present for Queen Victoria. Mr. Casey tapped the gland of his neck and smiled at Stephen with sleepy eyes. And Mr. Dedalus said to him, "Yes, well, now that's all right. Oh, we had a good walk, hadn't we, John?" "Yes, I wonder if there is any likelihood of dinner this evening." "Yes." "Oh, well, now we got a good breath out of the ozone round the head today, I bet that." He turned to Dante and said, "You didn't stir out at all, Miss Riordan?" Dante frowned and said shortly, "No." Mr. Dedalus dropped his coat tails and went over to the sideboard. He brought forth a great stone jar of whiskey from the locker and filled the decanter slowly, bending now and then to see how much he had poured in. Then, replacing the jar in the locker, he poured a little of the whiskey into 2 glasses, added a little water, and came back with them to the fireplace. "A thimbleful, John," he said, "just to whet your appetite." Mr. Casey took the glass, drank, and placed it near him on the mantelpiece. Then he said, "Well, I can't help thinking of our friend Christopher manufacturing." He broke into a fit of laughter and coughing and added, "Manufacturing that champagne for those fellows." Mr. Douglas laughed loudly. "Is it, Christy?" he said. "There is more cunning in unto those warts on his bald head than in a pack of the Jack Foxes." He inclined his head, closed his eyes, and licking his lips profusely, began to speak with the voice of a hotel keeper. "And he has such a soft mouth when he's speaking to you. Don't you know? He is very moist and watery about the dewlaps, God bless him." Mr. Casey was still struggling through his fit of coughing and laughter. Stephen, seeing and hearing the hotel keeper through his father's face and voice, laughed. Mr. Douglas put up his eyeglass and, staring down at him, said quietly and kindly, "What are you laughing at, you little puppy, you?" The servants entered and placed the dishes on a table. Miss Douglas followed and places were arranged. "Sit over," she said. Mr. Douglas went to the end of the table and said, "No, Miss Riordan, sit over. John, sit you down, my hearty." He looked round to where Uncle Charles sat and said, "No, then, sir, there is a berth here waiting for you." When all had taken their seats, he laid his hand on a cover and then said quickly, withdrawing it, "No, Stephen." Stephen stood up in his place to say the grace before meals. "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which through thy bounty we are about to receive through Christ our Lord. Amen." All blessed themselves, and Mr. Douglas, with a sigh of pleasure, lifted from the dish the heavy cover pearled around the edge with glistening drops. Stephen looked at the plump turkey which had lain, trussed and skewered, on the kitchen table. He knew that his father had paid a guinea for it in Dame of the Dealer Street, and the man had prodded it often at the breastbone to show how good it was. And he remembered the man's voice when he had said, "Take that one, sir. That's a real ollie-dolly." Why did Mr. Barrett in Cloghouse call his pandybats a turkey? But Cloghouse was far away, and the warm, heavy smell of turkey and ham and celery rose from the plates and dishes, and the great fire was banked high and red in the grate, and the green ivy and red holly made you feel so happy. And when dinner was ended, the big plum pudding would be carried in, studded with peeled almonds and sprigs of holly, with a bluish fire running around it and a little green flag flying from the top. It was his first Christmas dinner, and he thought of his little brothers and sisters who were waiting in a nursery as he had often waited, till the pudding came. The deep low collar and the Eton jacket made him feel queer and oldish. And the morning when his mother had brought him down to the parlour, dressed for mass, his father had cried. That was because he was thinking of his own father. And Uncle Charles had said so too. Mr. Dedalus covered the dish and began to eat hungrily. Then he said, "Poor old Christy. He is nearly lopsided. No with roguery." "Simon," said Miss Dedalus, "you haven't given Miss Riordan any sauce." Mr. Dedalus seized the sauce bout. "Haven't I?" he cried. Miss Riordan, pity the poor blind. Dante covered her plate with her hands and said, "No, thanks." Mr. Dedalus turned to Uncle Charles. "How are you off, sir?" "Right as a mail, Simon." "You, John?" "I'm all right. Go on yourself." "Mary here?" "Stephen, here's something to make your hair curl." He poured sauce fiercely over the Stephen plates and set the boat again on a table. Then he asked Uncle Charles, was it tender? Uncle Charles could not speak because his mouth was full, but he nodded that it was. That was a good answer our friend made to the canon. "What?" said Mr. Dedalus. "I didn't think he had that much in him," said Mr. Casey. "I'll pay your dues, father, when you cease turning the house of God into the polling booth." "A nice answer," said Dante, "for any man calling himself a Catholic to give to his priest. They have only themselves to blame," said Mr. Dedalus suavely. "If they took a full advice, they would confine their attention to religion." "It's a religion," Dante said. "They are doing their duty in warning the people." "We go to the house of God," Mr. Casey said, "in all humility to pray to our Maker and not to hear election addresses." "It is religion," Dante said again. "They're all right. They must direct their flocks and preach politics from the altar, is it?" asked Mr. Dedalus. "Certainly," said Dante. "It's a question of public morality. A priest would not be a priest if he did not tell his flock what is right and what is wrong." Miss Dedalus laid down her knife and fork, saying, "For pity's sake and for pity's sake, let us have no political discussion on this day of all days in a year." "Quite right, ma'am," said Uncle Charles. "No, Simon, that's quite enough now. Not another word now." Yes, said Mr. Dedalus quickly. He uncovered the dish boldly and said, "Now then, who's for more turkey?" Nobody answered. Dante said, "Nice language for any Catholic to use." "Miss Riordan, I appeal to you," said Miss Dedalus, "to let the matter drop now." Dante turned on her and said, "And am I sit here and listen to the pastors of my church being floated? Nobody is saying a word against them," said Mr. Dedalus, "so long as they don't meddle in politics. The bishops and priests of Ireland have spoken," said Dante, "and they must be obeyed. Let them leave politics alone," said Mr. Casey, "or the people may leave their church alone. You hear?" said Dante, turning to Miss Dedalus. "Mr. Casey, Simon," said Miss Dedalus. "Let it end now." "Too bad, too bad," said Uncle Charles. "What?" cried Mr. Dedalus. "Were we to desert him at the bidding of English people?" "He was no longer worthy to lead," said Dante. "He was a public sinner." "We are all sinners, and black sinners," said Mr. Casey coldly. "Woe be to the man by whom the scandal comes," said Miss Riordan. "It would be better for him that the millstones were tied about his neck and that he were cast into the depths of a sea rather than that he should scandalize one of these my least little ones. That is the languages of the Holy Ghost, and very bad language, if you ask me," said Mr. Dedalus coolly. "Simon, Simon," said Uncle Charles the boy. "Yes, yes," said Mr. Dedalus. I was thinking about the bad languages of the railway porter." "Well, no, that's all right. Here, Stephen, show me your plate, old chap. Eat away now. Here." He heaped up the food on a Stephen plate and served Uncle Charles and Mr. Casey two large pieces of turkey and splashes of the sauce. Miss Dedalus was eating little, and Dante sat with her hands in her lap. She was red in the face. Mr. Dedalus rooted with the carvers at the end of the dish and said, "There is a tasty bit here we call the Pope's nose. If any lady or gentleman—" He held a piece of full up on a prying of the carving fork. Nobody spoke. He put it on his own plate, saying, "Well, you can't say, but you were asked. I think I had better eat it myself, because I'm not well in my health lately." He winked at Stephen and, replacing the dish cover, began to eat again. There was a silence while he ate. Then he said, "Well, now, the day kept up fine after all. There were plenty of strange down too." Nobody spoke. He said again, "I think there were more strange down than the last Christmas." He looked round at the others, whose faces were bent towards their plates and receiving no reply, waiting for a moment, and said bitterly, "Well, my Christmas dinner has been spoiled anyhow." This video is made for Navid Daria's page.